It's the big one, and while unavailabilities for both sides still pester the conversation coming into Sunday's North London derby, from an Arsenal point of view, I see it as a real opportunity. An opportunity to find solutions, an opportunity for Arteta's hand to potentially be forced, and the various decisions he has to make ranging from team selection, the prospect of Arsenal's evolution and adaptation, especially with the void of Martin Odegaard, team dynamics, and also the elements of Ange Postecoglou's Spurs team to target are all going to be covered today in this tactical preview. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once again. And I need a haircut, and as a crunch week for Arsenal begins, let's start with the main principles I want to see from Arteta in this team selection going into the derby. And as this video progresses, you watching at home can make your own individual decisions for and about personnel here and there, but the priorities for me in this fixture are as follows. I think we need enough steel centrally to first of all counterpunch against an aggressive Spurs man-to-man press, but also, and arguably most importantly, out of possession to deal with how they cluster the pitch centrally in their build-up and try and overload the middle, and then look to spring out quickly, playing at a fiery, fast tempo. Focus number 2 is ensuring we have a middle third or second phase presence alongside Thomas Partey to help control the tempo of our play and connect the team together. This, I think, for me, is the single biggest hindrance that we have without Martin Odegaard, that security in the middle third to help connect the team together. So I think ensuring that Odegaard loss does not ruin our build-up control is also key. But lastly, number 3 is about maximising Arsenal's transitional threat, making sure we have the dynamics in place to reliably stretch this Spurs high line, especially in those wider channels. So how does Arteta go about doing that? Well, Arteta is a manager we know that works off familiarity. History has told us he opts for this familiarity and security over really transformative changes to the team's dynamics. However, in this specific case, especially with some of the profiles that we're missing, I feel like Arteta's hand is forced more, and there is at least the argument for him to balance the security he feels in the formally established with a slightly bolder approach. So let's take you through the varying options that Arsenal have for the North London derby in terms of team selection and explain the tactics behind these setups. The first includes Havertz's continuation in the centre forward, Sterling's potential Arsenal bow, Saka and Timber's revisions in their positioning, and Calafiori's inclusion. This is a setup that's going to often verge on something like a 4-2-4, but don't worry, this doesn't turn Saka into a shadow striker, an approach that arguably gives Arteta the opportunity to take Odegaard's absence and turn it into a way that allows the squad to adapt in a really positive way. It's a chance to show a variety of dynamics once more. Many of you are going to ponder this lineup, I'm sure, and come to your own conclusions, but this is not as outlandish as you might first think. It's actually one that really excites me. The big point of interest, of course, is the midfield balance. Instead of Thomas Partey being joined by an inverted left back, with Odegaard as that option that swings deeper and Rice as the left centre mid offset higher, we've arguably flipped the dynamics with Saka the highest of the midfield 3, if you want to call it that, but also we've got a fixed double pivot here in Timber and Partey. I mean, Odegaard this season, for whatever reason, has not yet been that build-up general who dominates a lot of our deep touches. I think Saka as well is more than capable of swinging deeper if ever needed, and especially with that presence of a fixed double pivot, that security in the build-up with the option to have Calafiori as that third man addition in the midfield. He's going to be less overburdened to get deep and get central with his touches, even though he can do this. Instead, Saka can be that touch-heavy final third dictator in the middle that Odegaard is for us. In this way, at least the way I see it and I'm explaining, I believe Saka is the best Odegaard replacement in the squad. That is, if you're someone who is reticent about Ethan Nwaneri's ability to impose himself on his first Premier League start away at Spurs. But probably the best reason to explain Saka's positioning in this this right centre mid or right 10 spot here is the connection with Raheem Sterling. In that final third, again, Saka is going to be taking up those Odegaard-esque positions, but here with that partnership with Raheem Sterling, who is adept at hugging the touchline wide from right wing. That left foot to right footed connection is really nice, and this translates to our transitional dynamics I was talking about at the start. Saka getting on the spin quickly, playing these types of passes through to Sterling, who's darting into those grey spots and channels either side of the fullbacks in behind. Really weak areas for Spurs, who also of course boast that aggressive high line. But what really excites me as well is the prospect of having this front four or this front three plus Saka. For me, I don't even see it as set in place positionally. Remember our rotations in pre-season that have gone missing now, where the wingers would rotate in to join the top of our box midfield, leaving room out wide for either the fullback to promote, and this suits a Calafiori or White all ends up, but it also allows Saka and Kai Havertz to rotate out wide and keep a real fluid front line. I think this can potentially cause a brilliant type of chaos. Saka's ability to be a playmaker, carrier or runner on the inside or outside, Sterling's threat in behind from wide or dribbling through the middle, Kai Havertz, as he did against Brighton really well, floating across that front line to be an out ball. We've got these direct threats, I think, across the pitch on standby at all times. And look, I'm a really big fan of Postecoglou. I think, even though I'm an Arsenal fan, he's instilled a culture and an identity. He plays with the intention to always dominate on the pitch. He profiles his players to a really high standard. He tactically is very good, but if we are talking about margins of where Spurs can be exposed tactically, it's how resolute Postecoglou is in using that 2-3-5 shape across the thirds. As soon as they get the chance, they transition into this normal on-ball shape. And in deep areas, this can leave their centre-backs cut off from the midfield. And if and when we have the time on Sunday, I'd like us to spring from that mid-block to a more front-footed approach, and we can make the most of, especially when Spurs' inverted fullbacks have rotated with their number 8s, turning the ball over potentially with James Maddison loitering in their rest defence. For me, the only question, and it's a fair question, is Timber's readiness to help anchor with Partey. But this is something that he's essentially, guys, been doing for the last 2 games, even if it hasn't been yet to the maximum effect as he gets his rhythm back. The familiarity argument is an interesting one here though, because this isn't an unfamiliar role for Jurrien Timber, and losing the bite in the middle of the pitch for a Jorginho is also another move that Arteta could make, but it also isn't a very Arteta move to lose that out of possession ascendancy in the centre. If Jorginho does play in a double pivot with Partey, let's try and create a harder shell surrounding them. I spoke at the beginning about protecting the centre. That's of course made harder here with the mobility issues. So let's keep the distances tight. Let's squeeze up in our mid-block, back our back four to go 1v1 against the Spurs attackers, jump out when we can, impose ourselves on the game with the ball, with Jorginho and Partey, and then we get Rice back for the Etihad trip anyway. For what it's worth, I think this is what Arteta will do on Sunday. It's a 4-2-4 base, a fixed double pivot and a front 4. I believe Arteta is going to be forced to alter his dynamics to this. You have Timber darting into positions Kivior took up against Liverpool when we played a Rice and Jorginho double pivot last season, when we transition into that 2-3 or 3-2-5. Jesus, if fit, plays alongside Kai Havertz, and the left wing then becomes a toss-up between 3 options. Although Kai Havertz would be in a similar centre-forward duo, it wouldn't be the left shadow striker we've come to know, because there is that much more set double pivot behind him. The Leverkusen blueprint in pre-season is still there though, for Jorginho, Partey and then Timber annexed on to try and make us control enough of the build-up to play through a front-footed Spurs press into that false 90 presence in Trossard or Jesus, keep Havertz as that stretching force. Normally I would be worried about Havertz and Martinelli wanting to run into the same spaces, but with Jesus' rotations and Kai Havertz's relationship with Saka, we may see them switched more. And again, that fluidity is something this front four offers a real good prospect of. I'd like to see Timber, as I've just mentioned, helping out in the build-up, becoming a third man, because I think with Saka back to right wing now in this example, we are short on someone in, without Odegaard's present, in someone who can take a lot of touches for us. I would prefer a left-hand side, most of all probably with Raheem Sterling for this occasion, having that touchline play. I think he combines really well with Timber in the pockets and gives us some ball carrying progression on the left hand side. You can see how this lineup finds itself somewhere in between sticking and twisting. The on-ball dynamics are absolutely fine. It's just protection in the middle outer possession I'm going to be apprehensive with. Let's talk more broadly now on the decision between Timber and Jorginho, because to repeat, Spurs are going to be up on our backs, especially early on in their man-to-man press. And if you want to criticise Timber for the opening 2 games or the opening 3 games of this season, the thing he has shown absolutely no time getting back into the swing of things with is his ability to spin out, get on the spin when someone's up his backside, or to subtly dismark himself to invite a collapse and then spring out. So going back to that first team example I showed you, I like the arguably bolder pick of a Timber and Partey fixed double pivot because it suits us. I don't think it's going to have an unnatural look. As I've discussed, Saka for me is our best Odegaard replacement. Saka is going to run a lot of our attacks as normal, and for Timber, 90% of his touches are going to be in the exact same positions as the last 2 games, central in a pivot alongside Partey. As for out of possession here, Saka is going to become our Odegaard force in the press, a change that had to be made regardless with Odegaard out, and Timber will take on the left centre mid's job, marshalling the Spurs number 6. Partey managing Maddison's freer movement, which already gives Partey enough to deal with as it is. Timber may not be 90-minute ready yet, but I want the option of his snappy tackling, low to the ground bite and coverage in the middle, and that burst against a Spurs team who again cluster, overload the middle of the pitch and play at a very high tempo through the thirds. But it also looks like Kulusevski or Sarr will start ahead of Bentancur in the right centre mid too, and their ability to carry the ball I think requires, again, better ground coverage without Declan Rice. If we lose the ball higher up as well, I like the prospect of Timber covering in behind Calafiori in the channel, because in this 4-2-4 I have set up here, our 2-3 or 3-2-5 in settled play in the final third is going to look something like this. And I think a Timber Calafiori on the pitch at the same time is actually a really interesting combination, because how do they alternate between taking touches deeper or occupying higher? So you tell me, is the selection actually that bold? As always, we'll get talking in the comments. What I would say quickly on this last selection is that Trossard definitely has a big potential in starting, because he can take some of the touches in the build-up on our left-hand side if we are ever struggling, and include this with the argument of form. His inclusion over Martinelli does make sense, especially if we want Kai Havertz stretching or rotating out from the wide left channels, or this may mean that Calafiori, if he's fit himself, could find himself above and beyond more and more. There are obviously doubts over Calafiori's fitness, but if ready, I think for a 4-2-4, he is the best suited left back in the squad that we have. He gives us an overlap in the final third, and for this encounter probably pips Timber defensively because of how well his left-footedness matches up with the right-footed dominance of Odegaard and particularly Johnson. He has the mobility to not compromise our transitional defence, to annex on, as well as an option in that build-up, or be a runner higher up. Again, I just want balance in this team, that list that I mentioned at the beginning, and the question, of course, again, for Arteta is how he weighs up that rejigging of dynamics with his propensity to err towards the more familiar. For example, some people really want Kai Havertz in his more normal left shadow striker role, and this definitely gives us the legs and the coverage out of possession. It's a role that he knows, but I think here on the ball you either play the risk of having no help in the middle third unless you move Saka back inside and then wait for the inversions from Timber from left back. There's potentially no real second phase presence in this lineup without Saka taking on a really Odegaard-esque role. Again, he can do that, but all these questions come down to Arteta. We know those counter movements of Trossard, Havertz and Jesus work really well together, trying to manipulate that Spurs high line, but maybe with this selection, Havertz in the shadow striker role, we lack that Zinchenko imprint on the left-hand side to make the way the ball moves smooth and fluid, especially with Timber getting back up to speed. This is definitely a setup that can work. That battle between Romero and Havertz, assuming Mickey van der Ven is back and Romero moves back to right centre-back, will be feisty to say the least. But I just think we may as well go and embrace all out the 4-2-4. And overall, I go into this Spurs game with a lot of excitement. I think it's such an opportunity to not only win and add some energy back into our season after the lull we've had with the news over the international break and the Brighton fixture, but also it's a chance to find solutions that are potentially already in-house. Because we do go to Manchester City next, most likely without Martin Odegaard. We need to evolve tactically in some way. But as always, let me know in the comments below. Which selection would it be for you? Again, as long as I see a prioritization of those key points at the start of the video that I mentioned, I will largely be okay with the selections. You know my preferred options now, but I want to hear about yours. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video and learned something, I think, about how Arsenal could potentially move forward into the North London derby, the key tactical priorities for them, at least for me, that brings the game into the spotlight, and also the potential avenues we should be looking at to exploit a still very good Tottenham Hotspur team. That is all from me though. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.